What would you do if the person you trusted most shattered your world? This is the story of betrayal, resilience, and finding unexpected hope when everything seemed lost. Growing up, I was constantly surrounded by whispers of heartbreak and betrayal. My father's infidelities weren't just hushed family secrets, they were open wounds that festered in our household. His frequent absences, unexplained late nights, and the faint scent of cheap perfume lingering on his shirts stood in stark contrast to my mother's unwavering loyalty. I often found myself wondering why she stayed. Why she endured the humiliation. As a child, I clung to the belief that love was magical, a force strong enough to weather any storm. But the cracks in their marriage revealed a harsh truth: trust is fragile, and love, in the wrong hands, can become a weapon. I swore my life would be different. When I met Jody in high school, I thought I'd found everything I had hoped for. She radiated kindness, loyalty, and a sense of shared purpose. Together, we built a relationship on what I believed to be mutual respect and transparency. From the moment we exchanged vows, I envisioned a future free from the chaos and pain I grew up with. I was determined to give her the stability my parents never had. But even the strongest foundation can falter. Illusions of security can crumble under life's unpredictable storms. The night Jody chose to spend in the company of another man wasn't just another evening, it marked the end of an era for me. She must have thought I wouldn't take it seriously, that her pursuit of a fleeting thrill would pass unnoticed. Maybe she even believed it wouldn't matter to me. But she couldn't have been more wrong. What she dismissed as harmless excitement tore through me like a betrayal that unraveled the very fabric of our marriage. That evening, I was at my desk, sipping coffee, my mind drifting to memories of the morning we shared. Jody and I had been together for as long as I could remember. We met in high school and, despite the occasional break during arguments, we always found our way back to each other. We had given each other our innocence before prom and married just 9 months after graduation. As far as I knew, I had been her only partner. Then my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number flashing on my phone screen and hesitated to answer. Unfamiliar calls usually meant scams or telemarketers, and I hated dealing with them, especially the fake IRS ones. Still, something compelled me to pick up this time. The caller ID showed Jody's office number. "Hi, sweetheart," I greeted, expecting to hear her voice. But instead of Jody, a formal and unfamiliar voice replied, "This isn't your wife, Mr. Taylor." I froze, taken aback. Yes, this is John Richard Taylor III, but most people call me Trey." "Who's this?" "I'm Michael Hamilton," the man said evenly. "I work with your wife. There's something important I need to discuss with you. Can you meet me this afternoon?" His serious tone immediately put me on edge. "What's going on? Is Jody all right?" "She was fine when I left her this morning." "She's fine, at least physically," Michael replied. "But I have some information about her I think you should hear. Can you meet me at noon?" When I tried pressing him for more details, he refused to elaborate over the phone. Reluctantly, and with a growing knot of anxiety in my chest, I agreed. At noon, I met Michael outside Spike's restaurant. He greeted me briefly and suggested we take a walk instead of sitting down, saying it would be better to talk away from prying ears. Without much choice, I followed him as we headed toward Central Park. "Your wife has been spending a significant amount of time with a coworker, Stan Morrison," he began, speaking with careful precision. "They go to lunch together almost every day. Today, I overheard them openly discussing their plans for tomorrow night." I felt my chest tighten. "Plans?" I asked, my voice uncertain. Michael didn't hesitate. "Dinner at the Hilton, dancing afterward, and then they're planning to spend the night together." The ground seemed to shift beneath me. "Are you saying, they're already involved?" Michael nodded. "Yes. Stan's made reservations, and your wife spent her lunch break shopping for something to wear." I felt my mind spin as the implications set in. My voice cracked as I asked, how do they think they can get away with this? She believes you care about her enough to tolerate her exploring something new with another man, he said, his tone calm but unyielding. She doesn't think it will damage your relationship. I stopped walking, unable to take another step. My legs felt weak. Why are you telling me all of this? I asked, staring at Michael, trying to make sense of why he was even involved. His expression shifted, hardening into something resolute. I was married for 9 years when my wife betrayed me with an affair, and the legal system only added to my heartbreak. Now, I'm determined to help someone else avoid the situation I found myself trapped in. Michael and I continued talking for a while longer before he left, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I couldn't stop thinking about what he had told me, about my marriage and the uncertain future looming ahead. If Michael's account was true, then my marriage was already over, and what scared me most was how easily I could accept that possibility based on a single conversation. Reflecting on it later, I realized why the idea didn't seem as outlandish as it should have. I had grown up witnessing the pain of betrayal firsthand. My father's infidelities had shattered my mother, and I swore I'd never endure what she went through. Watching her heartbreak shaped how I viewed relationships and commitment. Call me what you will, but I knew I wasn't going to tolerate my wife having an affair, not even for a moment. Even imagining it made me feel physically ill. Eventually, my mother left my father, and her life improved in ways I hadn't expected. She remarried a good man, someone who treated her with the love and respect she deserved, and she's genuinely happy now. Ironically, Jody and I live in a house owned by my mother and stepfather. That fact made the situation all the more bitter. I couldn't let what happened to my mother repeat itself in my life. As I mulled over what to do, I felt torn. Should I confront her outright? Or wait and see if suspicion alone would make her abandon her plans? Either choice felt unbearable. In the end, I decided to act as if nothing had changed, hoping to gather more clarity. That night, I fried pork chops for dinner, sticking to our usual routine. Acting normal was far more difficult than I'd imagined. Jody, either a master actress or too confident in her secrecy, didn't betray a hint of guilt. She seemed completely at ease, as if nothing was amiss. By 11 p.m., she had gone upstairs and fallen asleep. I showered, trying to steady my nerves, then lay awake next to her, unable to close my eyes. My mind raced with everything Michael had said, every possibility of what might come next. At 6 a.m., Jody woke up, got dressed, and headed downstairs like it was just another day. A few minutes later, I followed her, trying to maintain my composure. If the truth was going to surface, I needed to be ready. For now, all I could do was watch and wait. While at work, I found myself assisting an elderly couple interested in purchasing a 45-foot motorhome. At first, I was skeptical. It's a lot of vehicle to handle, and I wasn't sure they were up for it. But as we spent more time together, I realized how wrong I was. They were lively, sharp, and shared a bond that was unmistakably loving. Watching them made me yearn for something similar with Jody, a relationship filled with energy and connection even in our later years. They eventually chose a van, and we took it for a test drive. Mr. Jacobson, full of confidence, navigated the vehicle with ease, showing he was more than capable. But the momentary escape at work didn't last long. That evening, back at home, the fragile illusion of normalcy shattered. As we sat together, Jody turned to me, her tone casual yet carrying a bombshell of a confession. "I've never been with anyone else," she began, her words hanging heavily in the air. "I'd like to sleep with someone else. We're going to dinner, then dancing, and spending the night at a hotel." The blood drained from my face. I couldn't believe how calmly she said it, as if she were telling me about running errands. "You can't be serious," I stammered, my voice shaking. "You're really planning to spend the night with another man?" "I'm not agreeing to that." "Who is this guy, and what are you even talking about?" She waved off my disbelief like it was nothing. "It's no big deal, she said dismissively. Just one night of fun. I'll be back tomorrow, and it'll be like nothing happened. Her words hit me like a freight train. My mind reeled, struggling to grasp her indifference. But something inside me snapped. I didn't yell or argue further, I simply acted. I went upstairs, grabbed a box of trash bags, and spent the next 2 hours methodically removing every trace of her from the house. Her closet was emptied, the contents of her bathroom vanity packed away, and even her birth certificate, high school diploma, and social security card removed from the safe. I gathered family photo albums, school awards, and the bronze Remington statue her grandfather had given her. Everything went into her car. I cleared out her magnets from the fridge, loaded the last of her belongings into the vehicle, rolled it out of the garage, and parked it on the street. By the time I was done, the house felt both lighter and eerily empty. The next morning, as she prepared to leave, I confronted her at the door. "If you get in that man's car tonight, you won't have a place to come back to," I said firmly. "All your stuff is in your car." Her face paled as the words sunk in. "You can't be serious," she stammered, visibly shaken. "It was just..." I didn't let her finish. "You made your choice," I said, and with that, I shut the door in her face. She began pounding on the door, but I opened it once more, my patience gone. "If you don't stop banging, I'll call the police and have you arrested," I said coldly. Then I closed the door for good. There was no coming back from this, for her, or for us. After years of selling motorhomes, I was initially doubtful about the Jacobsons' ability to handle a 45-foot vehicle. But as we spent more time together, it became clear they were in great shape, full of life, and had a bond one couldn't help but envy. Watching their playful banter and shared excitement reminded me of what I had once hoped for with Jody, a vibrant, lasting partnership. By the end of the test drive, my doubts had disappeared, replaced by a quiet longing that our marriage could still become something as strong as theirs. The Jacobsons picked their van and, as Mr. Jacobson confidently navigated it on the test drive, my mind drifted back to my own situation. My chest felt heavy knowing the stark difference between their happiness and the state of my marriage. I envied their energy, their connection, and their trust. That evening, I tried to approach things with Jody casually, as though nothing had changed. But her calm demeanor when she brought up her plans blindsided me. "I've been thinking," she said, her tone unnervingly even. "I'd like to sleep with someone else. Tomorrow night, I'm going to dinner with a guy from work. Then dancing. And I'll be spending the night with him at a hotel." I felt the blood drain from my face. "You can't be serious," I stammered. "You're really planning to spend the night with another man?" "I'm not agreeing to that." "Who is this guy, anyway?" She waved her hand dismissively. "It's no big deal. Just one night of fun. I'll be back tomorrow, and everything will go back to normal." Her words gutted me. Normal? I stood there, struggling to understand how she could think I'd ever be okay with this. When she left the next day, I couldn't sit idly by. Fueled by a mix of anger and heartbreak, I decided to act. I grabbed a box of trash bags and went upstairs. Over the next 2 hours, I removed every trace of her from the house. Clothes, toiletries, personal documents, everything. I even packed her birth certificate, high school diploma, and her family heirlooms, including her grandfather's bronze statue. By the time I was done, her belongings were piled in her car, which I rolled out of the garage and parked on the street. By the time she returned, I was waiting at the door. "If you got in that man's car last night," I said coldly, "then you don't have a place here anymore. All your stuff is in your car." She gaped at me, shocked. "You can't be serious." "It was just..." "It doesn't matter," I cut her off and slammed the door in her face. When she started pounding on the door, I opened it just enough to deliver a final warning. "If you don't stop banging on this door, I'll call the police." "You can't do that," she yelled. "This is my house too." Her voice cracked as she tried to push her way back inside. I stood firm, holding the door. "Talk to me, please," she begged. For a moment, I wavered. Then, slowly, I opened the door and let her in. That's when Judy appeared, her expression torn. "I thought you loved her," she said. "I can't believe you kicked her out over a stupid disagreement." "Stupid disagreement?" I repeated bitterly. "Did Jody tell you what this was really about? Did she mention she wanted to spend the night with a man from work?" Judy blinked, clearly caught off guard. "No, she just said you had a fight about going out. She didn't mention anything about another man." "Of course she didn't," I muttered. "She's spent weeks, maybe months, planning this with him. It doesn't matter if nothing happened. The fact that she planned to betray me is enough." Judy fell silent, clearly unsure how to respond. I didn't bother pressing further. Instead, I called my attorney the next day and filed the divorce papers. By that afternoon, Jody was served at work. Later that day, my phone rang. It was Michael Hamilton. "Mr. Taylor," he began, "I thought you'd want to know, there was some commotion at the office today. Your wife fainted after reading the summons. An ambulance had to be called." I didn't know how to respond to that, but Michael continued. "After that, she didn't say much. She just sat at her desk, only speaking with her lawyer. She and Morrison haven't interacted much, at least not in front of anyone. It wasn't long before our lawyers scheduled a meeting to begin sorting everything out. When I walked into that room and saw Jody for the first time since kicking her out, I barely recognized her. She looked thinner, worn out, and defeated. Even Judy was there, though I wasn't sure why. "Are you sure you want to be here?" I asked Judy quietly. She didn't answer, but her presence said more than words ever could. The tension in the room was thick as the conversation shifted back to Jody's claims. Judy finally broke the silence. "Okay, let's assume everything Michael said is true. Let's say these plans were made. But tell me this, was there anything physical? Any touching? Anything that wouldn't pass the so-called husband test?" "Absolutely not." Jody snapped, her tone sharp and defensive. "Nothing happened." Judy nodded, her expression unreadable. My lawyer glanced at me, his brow slightly raised, silently asking if I wanted to proceed. I met his gaze, then turned back to the table. Without saying a word, I picked up the remote, pressed play, and watched as a screen descended from the ceiling. On it was security footage from our own driveway. The video clearly showed Jody walking up to Stan Morrison's car. He stepped out, opened the door for her, and they kissed, long, passionate, and unmistakable. Then they got into the car together and drove off. I paused the video. The room fell silent. Jody turned pale, her hands trembling. "This is a violation. You had no right. Already entertaining Morrison, weren't you?" I interrupted, my voice cold. Jody screamed in frustration and bolted from the room. Judy hesitated for a moment, clearly torn, before following her sister out. Jody's lawyer stood, quickly gathering his papers. "It seems my client forgot to mention a few details," he muttered before rushing to leave as well. Later that afternoon, I returned to the dealership, trying to push the events of the morning out of my mind. I was at my booth when Judy appeared, her expression hesitant. She paused near my desk before speaking. "May I sit?" she asked quietly. "Sure," I replied, gesturing to the chair across from me. For a while, we sat in silence, the weight of everything unsaid filling the air. Finally, Judy broke it. "You knew, didn't you?" "Knew what?" I asked, confused by the sudden question. Judy opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, the office loudspeaker interrupted. "Trey, you have a call on line 6. I nodded apologetically and stepped away to take the call. It lasted about 15 minutes, but when I returned, Judy hadn't moved. She was staring into the distance, lost in thought. When she finally looked at me, her expression had shifted, serious, resigned. "She's gone, Trey," she said softly. "What do you mean, gone?" I asked, not entirely understanding. "She packed up and left. She's probably moved into her own place," Judy replied. Then, almost as an afterthought, she added, "She asked me to tell your parents she was sorry, for deserting you. But who knows what that means? We'll see." Just then, the phone rang again. I sighed and picked up. "Trey Taylor." "Good morning, Mr. Taylor. It's Michael Hamilton. Do you remember me?" "Of course, Michael. How's everything going?" I asked, sitting straighter in my chair. "Not bad," he replied. "I just wanted to update you on my situation. Remember my divorce?" "Yeah," I said, the memory of his struggles still fresh. "Your ex was living with her boyfriend, wasn't she?" "That's right," Michael confirmed, his voice taking on a grim tone. "Turns out, the guy's a thief. He convinced my ex to embezzle from her company. Now, they're both in jail." I leaned back in my chair, letting out a slow breath. "I guess you could call that karma," I said, unsure of how else to respond. Michael chuckled dryly. "Maybe. Just thought you'd appreciate the irony." I chuckled dryly at Michael's comment before shifting the conversation. "That's all well and good," I said, "but I'm focused on one thing now. I want a divorce, and Jody needs to sign the papers. When are you planning to ask her?" Judy interjected, her tone flat, almost disinterested. "There's nothing to ask," I replied firmly. "My lawyer is already handling it. But it would save him some trouble if she cooperated." After a pause, Judy said reluctantly, "She's living in Fort Lauderdale now." I frowned. "Why are you just telling me this? Why didn't you say anything sooner?" Over the next few days, Judy provided Jody's address and confirmed that she was aware the divorce papers were ready for her signature. When I passed the address to my lawyer, I thought it was the end of it. Then, one afternoon, Judy called me again. "She's still seeing him, Trey," Judy admitted hesitantly. "She's been to his place twice, and he's been to hers twice. 4 times, to my knowledge." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You knew she was still seeing him, and you were okay with it? After everything she's done?" My voice was cold, sharp. "She's my sister," Judy said quietly, as though that explained it all. I didn't respond. Instead, I ended the call abruptly, unable to stomach another word. Moments later, Judy called again, but I let it go to voicemail. I sat in my cubicle for a while, staring blankly at the desk, trying to process everything. Frustration and anger bubbled just beneath the surface. Eventually, I decided to walk it off and headed to the repair shop to chat with the mechanics. One of them, an old friend of mine and a retired Army veteran, caught my attention. He'd lost part of his leg and several fingers in combat but was one of the few people who truly understood resilience in the face of life's worst challenges. We talked for a bit, his grounded perspective offering a brief reprieve from my chaos. When I finally got home that evening, I forced myself to move through my routine without breaking down. I heated up some leftover spaghetti and meatballs, ate quickly, and headed to bed. By 10 p.m., I was out cold, the exhaustion of the day finally overwhelming me. The next morning, I was getting ready for work when I saw Judy waiting for me outside. She probably assumed I wouldn't cause a scene at work. She was wrong. As I tried to walk past her, she grabbed my arm. "Trey, listen to me," she pleaded. I yanked my arm free, glaring at her. "You don't have anything I want to hear. You let her come back to me while she was sneaking around with that fool, over and over, and you didn't tell me." "She just needed more time," Judy insisted, her voice tinged with guilt. "More time to fix things. To work through it. Forgive her." I snapped, my voice rising. Have you lost your mind? Do you have any idea what it's like living with a cheater? Do you remember what we grew up with? Watching mom go through hell because of dad's affairs. Judy flinched but didn't back down. Trey, she said softly, trying to reason with me, things are different now. People are freer to try new things. It's not the same as it was back then. Her words were like a slap in the face. I stared at her, incredulous. Freer to cheat, you mean? To destroy marriages? What kind of world do you think we're living in? I didn't wait for her answer. I stormed off, fuming. Was I living in an alternate universe? My mother had endured hell because of my father's infidelity, and now Judy was trying to tell me that it was okay? That it was acceptable for my wife to betray me in the name of modern relationships? The sheer absurdity of it all left me questioning everything I thought I knew. I loved Jody deeply, but her naivety could be astounding at times. Maybe that was part of what made this all so painful. For now, though, I had other things to focus on. At work, my boss handed me an assignment: drive the Jacobsons' motorhome back to Houston. Use the company credit card for expenses, he said. Great, I'll get packed, I replied, feeling an odd sense of relief. A few days away sounded like exactly what I needed. How long should I take? I asked. Take 4 days for the trip itself, he said, but don't rush back. Take 10 if you need it. The Jacobsons aren't in a hurry, and we don't need you here immediately. Hand over your pending deals to Ben, and he'll cover them. When I arrived in Vancouver, I went straight to the hospital where Mr. Jacobson was being treated. The room was filled with the hum of machines, and tubes surrounded him as Mrs. Jacobson fussed over his comfort. Despite the circumstances, her focus and devotion to her husband were palpable, a stark reminder of the kind of relationship I had once dreamed of having. As we prepared to load the motorhome, Mrs. Jacobson said, Trey, Darla will ride with you to help get the bus ready. Darla, their daughter, didn't seem thrilled with the idea. Darla, stop it, Mrs. Jacobson said firmly. You'll be fine. She doesn't want to go back with you, Mrs. Jacobson added apologetically. She thinks she should stay here with us. But your boss mentioned you might take a few extra days. He suggested driving through Yellowstone on the way back. We promised Darla we'd do that. I'll see what I can do, I replied, accepting the situation. As we prepared to leave, Mrs. Jacobson handed me a letter authorizing me to take the motorhome across the border. After a quick goodbye, we hit the road. By 7 a.m. the next morning, we were in Burley, Idaho. The overnight drive had been grueling, with only a few stops for coffee and sandwiches to keep me going. I was exhausted and irritable, and Darla's silence for most of the ride didn't help. Finally, she broke the quiet. I'm hungry. Is there anything to eat? She asked. The tension from the night before boiled over. I'm not your maid, I snapped, pressing the gas pedal harder. She glared at me before storming off to the bedroom area of the motorhome. By 9 a.m., I had to stop again. I pulled over, stretched, and tried to regain some composure. Darla seemed to manage everything quietly while I slept, something I couldn't help but notice despite my frustration. 3 hours later, we stopped at a truck stop in Dumas, Texas. It was past 10 p.m., and I was running on fumes. I made sandwiches, grabbed some coffee, and took the wheel again, determined to push through the night. By 8 a.m. the following morning, I finally pulled into the dealership in Houston. The trip had been a blur of exhaustion and tension, but at least it was over. As I parked the motorhome and handed over the keys, I felt a small wave of relief. One part of my chaotic life had finally been checked off the list. I desperately needed a break after everything, so I headed downstairs to the restroom. It had been less than a week since my return, but it felt like I'd been gone much longer. As I washed my face and tried to clear my mind, my boss walked by. Hey, you know the Jacobsons? He asked casually. Of course, I said. What about them? They're talking about buying another motorhome. That's great. I replied, genuinely surprised. I thought they might sell the one they have now. He shook his head. Not a chance. They love it. Now go home and get some rest, the break room needs a break from you. He chuckled as he walked off. I realized he was right. After just 3 days back, I was drained. When I finally got home, I showered, shaved, and crashed into bed. I didn't wake up for nearly 30 hours. For the first time in what felt like ages, I hadn't even thought about my phone. When I finally checked, I realized it wasn't where I thought I'd left it. I dug through the clothes I'd taken on the trip, but it was nowhere to be found. Frustrated, I called my boss. Hey, can you check the break room and the coach I brought back? I think I left my phone in one of them. Before he could respond, a loud crash outside grabbed my attention. I ran to the window and saw 2 cars tangled in a wreck. Racing to the scene, I realized one of the injured was Darla. Though she was clearly hurt, she didn't seem to be in immediate danger. As the medics worked on her, she looked up at me and managed a small smile. You always catch me at my best, she said weakly before passing out. The EMTs loaded her into the ambulance, and I called the Jacobsons to update them. Darla's okay, I reassured them. She's being taken to the hospital now. There was a brief pause before Mr. Jacobson's cold response cut through the line. A broken arm? Too bad it wasn't her neck. I froze, stunned by his words. A moment later, Mrs. Jacobson took the phone from him, her tone hurried and apologetic. I couldn't make out much of what she said before the line went dead. It left me shaken, wondering what kind of relationship they really had. Not long after, my attorney sent over the divorce papers to the address Judy had provided. When I opened the envelope, I couldn't help but notice Jody's bold signature scrawled in red marker. There was no mention of the pregnancy she had once claimed. If it had ever been real, she clearly wasn't acknowledging it now. In 2 months, I would officially be free. The thought of staying single started to appeal to me more and more. I couldn't help but reflect on my current state of celibacy, realizing it had been so long since I'd been with anyone. The thought lingered as I showered, trying to shake the feeling that had started creeping in. Work, at least, provided a welcome distraction. That week turned out to be one of my best yet. I sold 3 vans, one of which was a high-end luxury bus that had belonged to a country music star. The commission was incredible, and for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to feel a spark of hope about the future. I arrived at the Jacobson estate on Friday at 6 p.m., feeling slightly out of place. The house was nothing short of impressive, a sprawling estate with manicured lawns and a gleaming garage that now housed the boat I'd driven over from Vancouver. A valet approached to park my car, a strange experience for me, but I went along with it, handing over the keys before heading inside. The party was in full swing, with about 50 guests mingling throughout the grand interior. As I stepped in, Mrs. Jacobson greeted me warmly with a hug. "Trey, it's so good to see you," she said with genuine enthusiasm. "Where's your wife?" Her words caught me off guard, and I hesitated. I'm in the process of a divorce," I admitted, my tone measured. Her smile faltered for a moment, but she recovered quickly. "Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that," she said, patting my arm. "Well, I'm glad you're here tonight." The evening wore on, but I couldn't fully shake the weight of my thoughts. After a while, I found myself standing alone near the edge of the party, nursing a drink, when Darla appeared, her arms still in a cast. She looked at me, her expression unreadable. "You know," I said, unable to stop the words from spilling out, "the kindest thing you've ever said to me was while you were lying in the street bleeding." Her face fell, and she slumped into a nearby chair. I stood there awkwardly, avoiding eye contact. After a few moments of tense silence, I finally broke it. "How's the arm?" I asked, my tone softer now. "It itches like hell," she muttered. She held up a tool she'd been using to scratch beneath her cast. It looked like a makeshift back scratcher. I took a step toward the door. "I've got to go," I said. "Trey," she called after me, her voice hesitant. I turned slightly, waiting. "If I promise to behave," she said, her cheeks faintly pink, "would you have dinner with me?" The next day, around noon, the Jacobsons arrived at the dealership in their carriage-style SUV. I was busy with customers and couldn't greet them immediately, but 30 minutes later, after seeing my clients off, I made my way to the bus where they were waiting. Darla opened the door and greeted me with a small smile. "Hi. Come on in," she said. I stepped inside, purposefully avoiding the driver's seat as I made my way to the living area. The bus was tight on space, but the clever design allowed the living area to expand with sliding compartments. I immediately noticed the rich, comforting smell of lasagna wafting from the kitchen. "Here," Darla said, handing me a glass of wine. "Clink," she added, raising her own glass for a toast. We sat at the dining table, the space cozy but surprisingly functional. As we ate, we chatted, the conversation flowing more easily than I'd expected. We even finished off an entire bottle of wine without so much as a sharp word between us. After a couple of hours, I decided it was time to head back to work. "Thanks, Darla," I said as I stood. "It was a nice surprise, and the food was great." "My pleasure," she replied, walking me to the door. As I stepped down, she leaned in unexpectedly and kissed me gently. We both froze, stunned by the moment. "Is dinner still off the table?" she asked shyly, her cheeks flushed. I didn't have an answer right away, but the faint smile tugging at my lips said more than words could. She made lasagna, after all. I asked Darla about it one day. "She just knows," she replied, her cheeks turning a light shade of pink. Later, Robert pulled me aside. "Trey," he began, his voice serious, "Darla's tough on the outside, but she's a good girl at heart. She's been hurt a lot and uses that attitude as armor. Just, don't hurt her, okay?" "Understood," I said, though I thought Robert might be overreacting a bit. "I'm just saying," he continued, "treat her right." "Don't worry," I assured him. But before I could hang up, my phone rang again. It was Judy. "Trey, it's Judy," she said, her voice instantly reigniting my frustration. That evening, Darla and I went out for dinner. The waiter had been quick on his feet, even bringing us doggy bags. "I didn't know you had those here," I joked, trying to lighten the mood. The waiter grinned. "First time for everything." As we left the restaurant, I noticed the same guard was at the gate. His expression wasn't as amused as the last time. I glanced at Darla and teased, "I don't go on many dates." He's probably not used to seeing me leave in the same car I arrived in. Usually, I end up taking a cab. Darla chuckled softly, and when we got to her house, she invited me inside. "What would you like to drink?" she asked as she moved toward the kitchen. "A gin and tonic," I replied. We sat together in comfortable silence for a while. The quiet felt easy, almost natural. Then, out of nowhere, Darla leaned closer, breaking the silence with a move that left no room for misunderstanding. It was a moment of unexpected connection, and for once, I didn't question it. Life felt like it was starting to find a rhythm again. The echoes of my past, Jody, the betrayal, and the storm that followed, were distant now, fading into the background. Judy would occasionally update me on Jody's life, but the news felt more like a passing headline than something personal. Oddly, I no longer felt anger, just a muted sense of gratitude for the lessons the experience had taught me. Work at the dealership thrived. The Jacobsons became regulars, their zest for life a constant reminder of what a true partnership could look like. Their warmth extended beyond the business, they frequently invited Darla and me to dinner. Their unwavering support encouraged us as we navigated whatever it was we were building together. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was headed in the right direction.